This is the Enhanced Pod. Episode 4 features Clinton van der Berg, who spent years investigating performance-enhancing drug use in South African sport. What he uncovered became guns and needles. His research reveals why medical oversight matters and what happens when it doesn't exist. Let's dive in. Clinton, it is wonderful to have you here on the Enhanced Pod. What made you decide to go down this rather murky path? Well, what did you find fascinating about it?
Thanks, Leanne. Firstly, just to acknowledge you. It's terrific to be talking to an old friend, an old pro. And I guess we both share a love for storytelling, which is, I guess that was the genesis of the book for me. So firstly, in my original career, I was a sports writer for many years. I was writing the news or whatever was developing, and through the years, it was like constant. There were these doping cases, and I'd go and I'd interview athletes and officials. And inevitably, every single person who was busted for doping, there was this remarkable story behind it. Whether it was an accident, whether it was by design, the denials, those kind of things. And that certainly piqued my interest. And I used to have a scrapbook, and I'll just put away newspaper clippings and things like that. And it got thicker and thicker and thicker, and I just kept it. And then, of course, COVID hit. And I thought, well, we need a project for COVID. So I dived in. A lot of, the planets kind of aligned. There were a lot of very prominent, high-profile positives that came in. The stories were extraordinary. And I felt that, while they were out there and lots had gone on, there was no single repository for it. And what I wanted to do was to tell these stories in a non-academic way, something that would resonate with the public at large, resonate with athletes, with coaches, that kind of thing. And for me, the stories were spellbinding. It was remarkable. And myself, back in the day, probably 20 years ago, I dabbled a little bit. So I kind of knew what was at stake, what was at play, what they experienced to a very small degree. And then, this book came together, and I was ultimately satisfied because the stories were so compelling, and a lot of them very high profile heroes, but also, while their lives exploded, there was a sadness attached to it as well. And of course, I tried to put those voices into the stories as well.
I must say, when, I reached out to you and I thought, no, I need to get Clinton's book because I need to read it so that I can fully be, in that world and understand exactly what it is that you found. And when this book was put down on that counter at Exclusive Books down the road, I got such a fright at how thick it was. I thought it would be a little pamphlet just detailing a few stories. And actually, as I went into that book, I could feel something inside of me just getting heavier and heavier because there are just so many stories and so many lives that have been affected. I mean, did you at the outset realize that it would go that deep and be that widespread?
Not at all, because, of course, over, say, 20 years, these tales come in bits and pieces. And then when you put it together, you have this enormous body of work or body of evidence. I must say I was quite surprised. Some common themes ran throughout, which was, things like denial and what have you, and claims of innocence, etc., etc. So for me, yes, it did become quite a thick book because there were so many interesting stories, and the one, in fact, that ignited the book was a young girl called Liza de Villiers, who was 14 years old. She was the youngest person in the world to test positive for steroids at the time. And probably for 10 years, I searched for Liza all over the place. And I put out emails and on social media, things like that. And after about 10 years, somebody came back to me and said, here's Liesel's number. And that got the ball rolling. I phoned Liesel, and who was now, a middle-aged woman, because what she had done was in the mid-90s. And I was catching her like 20 years later, practically. And she said, let's meet for coffee. And I trekked down to a coffee shop in Alberton. And we sat, and she told me her story. And that for me was, okay, that was a sign. Let's do this. So the story starts off with Liesel's story, and it's remarkable.
Yeah, that was really heartbreaking to see what she had been through. And, at 14, you're still a baby. So I can just imagine how traumatic that must have been. Clinton, if we look a little bit at, this process of research, you mentioned the clippings. I'm sure there was a lot of word of mouth that, maybe you spoke to someone, they were like, oh, speak to this one. It's not like you put out a survey and said, who's on PEDs?
There were many different sources. There were several. There was a cyclist called David George, probably 15, 20 years ago. I reached out to him and he said, "Yo, let's go for dinner." So I went down to Cape Town and we went out for dinner and he told me his story to his credit, which is quite unusual because I'd say 90, maybe 95, 99% of people don't tell their stories. So yes, I had to rely on stompies and, Bush Telegraph and, hints and things like that. I mean, there was another guy, a friend, a bodybuilder, and we've been friends for years back from boxing and bodybuilding and things like that. I just phoned Kenny up, and Kenny isn't a competitive athlete. He does his own thing, bodybuilding and that. And he said, "Oh, I'll tell you about taking steroids, buying steroids, selling steroids, all that kind of thing." He was quite happy to, because he's the way he justified it was to say, "I'm not competing against somebody. I'm not cheating. I'm doing this for myself." So that was how he settled it in his mind. So I found people like that who were willing to talk. Of course, it was often a case of he said, she said. It was often a case of trying to talk to people around the athlete. Some flatly refused to talk to me. Fortunately, a lot of stuff was on the public record as well. So you have the SA Institute for Drug-Free Sport who oversee the testing in South Africa, and they're very public, they're very open. So the head of SAIDS is a guy called Khalid Galant. We met at the Holiday Inn a couple of years ago, and Khalid, that's the one interesting thing, is it's almost counterintuitive. He's very open, he's very direct. He engages with people who use steroids, that kind of thing. And he tries to get them on side because he tries to learn how this is going on and why it's going on. And so I found it very valuable to pick somebody like Khalid's brain. So the story isn't just about people who are doping and juicing and taking steroids. It's more than that. It's about the enablers, who makes this happen, how makes it happen, but also the people trying to shut it down, the people who are trying to police this. So a guy like Khalid Galant for me was a very important voice to be heard. So Khalid has some very sort of strident views around doping, but important views. And it's a fight he continues to fight.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is so pertinent, because it is a fight. I can't imagine the fight ever ending, which is why I think the concept of the enhanced games is such an interesting one. I mean, what were your initial thoughts when you heard of it? Good idea?
Not at all. But the interesting thing, LEIGH-ANN, is when you chat to people, you're at the braai or at your mate's house or something like that, and people hear about steroids, and they're so prevalent. And one of the themes that often comes through, people say, just make it a free-for-all, just go for it. Just let everybody, so that you have this even playing field. I can almost understand that logic. I mean, it's a bit warped, but I understand where they're coming from. And now suddenly we're seeing this is what's happening. So the organizers of these games are trying to put together a collection of elite athletes to get going. I mean, I'm very cynical about it. I think it's going to be a massive flop. I mean, what it is essentially is it's a great marketing trick for the anti-aging business, which is behind this. It's quite clever, but it's extremely cynical. The one thing they've got going for them, though, is that freak show aspect to it. So they will get eyeballs. They'll probably get a Netflix deal out of it as well. You'll have that curiosity, but no one's going to take seriously any world records that are broken, if that is indeed the case. That kind of thing. It'll be a bit like watching a car crash. You'll be quite interested, but you don't really want anything to do with it, because it's a little bit tawdry, it's a little bit dirty, and you don't really want to be part of it. Although you, as you do with a car crash, you take a quick look and you go.
Well, what do you think about the fact that it is going to be medically supervised, that, it's not a free-for-all and people are going to be turning into these monsters that we've never seen before, that they are trying to get the tension between getting the best out of performance? I mean, there's a very well-documented case of James Magnuson, who, was taking steroids and stuff. He put on like 10 kilograms and all of a sudden he was slower in the water just because there was too much muscle. So it seems that it's going to be a really interesting experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be also interesting to see those T's and C's, the disclaimers that, the athletes have to sign, that kind of thing. Of course, they're going to have, doctors alongside and things like that. I mean, could you imagine somebody who's not just taking steroids, but abusing them, the unintended consequences, so to speak. So what they're trying to do by saying we're going to have medical people, they're trying to put a veneer of respectability on this event to say, no, listen, we're all proper, we're above board, so we don't have authorization of the IOC or the IAAF or something like that. But what we're doing is proper, it's above board, it's safe, etc., etc. That's absolutely a fig leaf. There's no way that it deserves any respectability whatsoever.
I must say, one of the interesting things that I read in your book was about the South African connection to the word doping. Maybe you want to relate that story, because I had a really good giggle about that.
Yeah, so I mean, that goes back to something called the DOP system. I mean, it's over 100 years ago. I mean, it's extraordinary how it sort of emerged from the Afrikaner community. And I was unaware of this, but it's documented. So literally, as you say, the word doping emanated here on the southern tip of Africa, which I found amazing. I mean, we can't claim many firsts, but that's one of them. And again, just fascinating, utterly fascinating.
I must say, one of the things that came out of your book as well is that, when we hear the word doping, we think of isolated cheaters. But in some instances, I think, as your research showed, it could be a team at a time that's literally handing the stuff round to ensure the performance of the team. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly had those cases, and you must realize now it's a lot. The lid has been put on doping largely to a large degree. It's not the sort of Wild West as it used to be, certainly locally. But there are cases, for instance, at schoolboy level, where you have a young prop come in and he's 75 kilos, and the coach will say, "You need to visit the fridge." That's a euphemism. You need to go to the fridge and you need to get your juice and sort yourself out. But he can protest and say, "No, no, I just told him he must go, have a nice meal," that kind of thing. So some of it is organized, and you must imagine. Of course, you get your rogues. So a guy who's going to get his juice from some guy out of the back of a car or something like that. But then you also get organized where medical doctors will prescribe things. And in a lot of cases, I don't doubt that it's true. So what steroids do, not only does it increase performance, but it assists you in recovery. So a lot of these guys are enabled by a medical expert who will prescribe something for them and say, "No, don't worry, it'll be out your system," that kind of thing. Because what that medical expert is doing ultimately is trying to repair the athlete. Okay. And that, of course, just complicates things in a massive way. So in very, very few cases is it just the athlete on his own doing juice. Invariably, there's an enabler, especially when you're talking about younger athletes. That's almost certainly true. Lisa was a case in point. And the interesting thing for me was that through many interviews, sitting with her, I mean, it was very evident, talking to other people, looking at the evidence, looking at the case itself, that Stefan Kotze, her coach, who had been implicated in doping, so he was a big figure, and her father as well was one of those stereotypical pushy fathers, things like that. So it was very evident that she was enabled. In fact, she never said, "This is who gave me the steroids." But as you said earlier, at 14 years old, you cannot make her culpable. There's an adult in her life, in her orbit, who's absolutely culpable. I wasn't able to nail down exactly who, but I had my suspicions, as do most people.
I think probably the biggest worry of steroid use in particular is the use by youngsters, because, like you say, sometimes it comes down to vanity. It's not even just about performance. And if we look at that, the sort of pressures that you can put your body under, a developing body, all of a sudden you've got massive muscle growth, and those tendons and ligaments are going to be taking the strain, and that results in injuries and all other sorts of things. I mean, what are some of the signs that one should look for with youngsters using these drugs?
Yeah, very good point. Just going back a little bit, Leon, and I think it's compounded by things like social media, because what you're doing is you're looking big and buff, you're in the gym, so you're taking your selfie, you look great, the girls like it, that kind of thing. And a lot of that goes on. But you make an important point. So not only is it about competition, but it is about vanity as well. I mean, there was a case in Durban, for instance, where this whole school, they weren't particularly competitive in the sports field, and they sort of dug around a little bit, and they discovered it was these guys who were just injecting, who were taking stuff just so that they could look good on the beach. Yeah, I mean, the dangers are crazy. I mean, probably the most prevalent is something like aggression. It's really rampant. There's something that manifests. It's called steroid rage, which, I mean, you can work it out for yourself how lethal that can be. Obviously, pimply backs, things like that. What they call, I mean, if you'll excuse expression, but for men they call bitch tits, where they develop breasts because of what goes on with the steroids, shrunken testes. It's just, I mean, it's quite a price to pay, if you want to look good. This can be one of the consequences.
Did you find that women or girls or ladies were using steroids? Was that the kind of drug of choice? Because, you think of those side effects, the deepening of the voice, the jaw, that sort of thing.
Yes, but far less prevalent. Mostly in sports like athletics, where you need to be explosive. Also for injury, that kind of thing. But largely cycling as well. It popped up among women. And then strangely, you had things like lawn bowls, where you had beta blockers, for instance, which would slow your heart rate and calm you down, that kind of thing. If you look at SAIDs, every 6 months or so, they put out a list of positive cases. And I must say, the vast majority are athletes you've never heard of, and they cross a range of sports. But something like powerlifting dominates, and that's largely men in that realm. Stuff like mixed martial arts, etc., etc. I would say at a rate of women are found out at a rate of 10 to 1 against. So men overwhelmingly dominate.
In the South African context, why do people use performance-enhancing drugs?
Well, there's two main reasons. Is because they work. That's the one reason. And where, given our environment, etc., where we're at, the prize for success or for getting to the top, it can be so enormous. You think sort of socially, politically, where people are at. So you can have a young boy who comes from a very impoverished background and he's got some talent as a football or rugby player or something, and he can make it potentially, but maybe you need those small margins, that extra step. And so you've got all the talent and you're strong and this and that, but you're missing something. And often steroids can assist with that, give you that extra bit of help. And then, of course, the other reason people take steroids is to recover from injury. There's no question. And so there's this enormous pressure. I think rugby is a good example of it, where a guy gets injured and that there's such a conveyor belt of talent. There's so many players coming in. He's fearful. He's out the game for 3 months or 4 months, whatever the case might be. The next kid's going to come in and he's going to find himself looking in the rearview mirror saying it's all over because somebody's taken your spot. So guys get injured and they want to come back quickly. They want to come back as fast as possible, that kind of thing. Sometimes to numb the pain, that kind of thing. It's a vicious circle. It's a tough one, but ultimately it is to improve performance, no question. I mean, we've had several sprinters, I think, where, of course, there the margins are tiny. So if you can shave 1/100th of a second, it could make all the difference between, making the plane to the Olympics or not making the plane.
Did you at times feel compassion for the people you were talking to, that found themselves in this position, maybe for reasons of, I just needed that extra edge. I knew that guy was using anyway, so I just wanted it to be a level playing field.
It's a good question. It's a really good question, Leanne. And I often felt compassion. That's quite right. But compassion because very few of these athletes were like Lance Armstrong, who was a psychopath. For me, their crime was being naive, just being ridiculously stupid, and to take steroids, to think you're not going to get caught, that kind of thing. And they thought, I might just take a chance. They're not competing in very rare circumstances, they're not competing for millions of dollars or anything like that. It's for a bit more money or maybe a better status, something like that. But there were some truly sad stories. And there's no doubt, that the one thing that does emerge in terms of athletes defending themselves, so very few put their hand up and say, listen, I'm sorry, this was me, I did it. Okay, let me cop the punishment. A big chunk of them, they claim contamination. So you're taking supplements or something like that, and they say, listen, my supplements are contaminated. Interestingly, many of those cases are found to be true because the supplements industry is absolutely unregulated. It's like the Wild West out there. You can go tomorrow, LEIGH-ANN, and you can start mixing stuff in your garage and start flogging it on the corner. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. So what happens is guys go down to the local chemist, they grab something off the shelf, and often it is tainted. However, having said that, I'm also a believer in strict liability in that you're responsible for what's in your body. So it's your problem. Okay, and that's because you've got to have a line somewhere. So I think that's where you've got to draw the line. So if you're an elite athlete or you're a professional, it's up to you. Go to your doctor, have the stuff tested, or get something that you trust. I mean, there are supplements out there that are verified, that are cool, but there's a lot that aren't. You talk about compassion, young athletes who get driven out the game, who get buzzed 2 or 3 times. That's it. That's their career over. You think of a guy like Chileboy Pele, 3 positive tests, and that was him done. He was going to be the next great black rugby springbok, so he was in quite a special position, but never happened for him because it was just a shambles. because although these guys, they take it in that they're not smart, or they're not cunning enough, or they're not cynical enough like Armstrong to get away with it. So when the boom comes down, they get nailed, and it's very sad.
One of the interesting thoughts or ideas that have been put out there is that the person that will win is the one with the best doctor. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been proven. There was that famous 100-meter race. I think there were 8 guys in the starting lineup, and 6 of them in subsequent years were found to have juiced. And I think it's borne out by what you say. You had, for instance, at London, at 2012 Olympics in London, where they had those retroactive tests. So they would take your sample, they would store it, and then when the technology was good enough, they'd go back and test it to see. And dozens of medalists from London, for instance, have been found to have doped. Um, it's a dreadful reality, but that's the world we live in now. So I, if you see you see what's happening in Kenya, for instance, where athletes in their hundreds are getting bust. So if there's any great performance by a Kenyan athlete, it always comes with a little bit of an asterisk next to it. You've got to say, can I take it at face value? And that's sad. That's really sad, because you might have an athlete who's had this breakout performance, who's a real talent, but you've always got to be skeptical, and that's what it's come to.
We've mentioned a few of the things, we've spoken about steroids, but what are some of the other performance enhancing drugs that can be used? I mean, I saw with horror the other day that something as silly as a Corenza C is banned by WADA. Sinutab contains, these prohibited substances. What else is out there?
Gosh, I mean, there's so much. There's something like ephedrine, for instance. And funny enough, ephedrine's quite hard, to get your. It's essentially a fat burner, but it's quite hard to get your hands on now, because it's also an ingredient for crystal meth. So when guys are cooking up crystal meth, they use ephedrine, that kind of thing. There's EPO, which is is a hormone produced by the kidneys, and what they do is it stimulates the production of red blood cells. And that, of course, improves your oxygen, so you get less fatigued, that kind of thing. But you'd be surprised, LEIGH-ANN, at how long the list of banned substances is. It's extraordinary. Almost every cough medicine you can think of. A lot of them have something called pseudoephedrine as well. So that just contributes to it being banned. So if you're an athlete and you get ill, geez, you've got to be super careful, super cautious around what you do take. I'm just trying to think of some of the accidents. People claim to have overdosed on Red Bull because their caffeine is through the roof, that kind of thing. All sorts, but almost, even there's over-the-counter medicines as well that you can get caught for as well. You have to be super careful. Back in the day, when Francois Pienaar and then they used to take Reactivat, those kind of things. Yeah, they pop a couple of what they called Roy Pillikies and things like that before a big match, and yeah, it would get them through.
Clinton, I'm sure you've heard all the stories over the course of your research. If I had to put you in charge of drug busting in South Africa, well, what is one of the things that you would do first, that you would think, okay, this is how we're going to stop this problem?
Give them a budget. So say to oversee the testing, they get a tiny amount of funding. It's ridiculous. If you just think of the cost of drug tests, which run into the thousands, they can barely scratch the surface. So notwithstanding that reality, they're still catching cheats, but there's so many slipping through the net as well. So SAIDs do a really good job. They kind of have these education seminars and things that they go around the country to schools and clubs and teams, and they spend time with athletes, which is quite a good way of spending your money, because you're not going to nip it in the bud entirely. But I think for me, funding is the absolutely critical thing. And the one thing that I found really interesting with the book, LEIGH-ANN, and talking to people and going to a couple of book launches and things, is South Africans aren't very discerning. A lot of people don't care. Absolutely ambivalent, indifferent. They kind of say, oh, let them do as they like. So I would try to change that narrative, because I'm not sure I want to be watching a sport where, like the enhanced games you talk of, where that people are cheating. And they're not on the level. I was quite alarmed by that, just that lack of discernment from people that, well, they didn't seem to care. I think if I could change that in some way, that would be a really important thing.
Yeah, it all comes down to budget at the end of the day. If we just look a little bit at how widespread this problem is, because there's no doubt from what you've seen that very few get caught. How do you avoid being caught if you are using? I mean, I think of something like anabolic steroids, like we've spoken about a few times already. But the interesting thing about that is that the effects of having taken this steroid can stay in your system, the benefits at least, stay in your system for up to 10 years because you've actually changed the cell at a biological level. You've impacted the nuclei of the cell. So that's an interesting one for me, in that you could take steroids and go off them and then don't test positive, but you're still enjoying the benefit of that.
Well, I think that's true, but your earlier questions or your earlier points about the doctors is the correct one, because what you need ultimately is you need somebody guiding you in terms, because you cycle it through your system. So you need an expert who understands the physiology of steroids and how medicine and the body works, so that you're able to time it, because often you know when the testing is going to happen, so that it cleans out your body and you're okay. I mean, what happens, interestingly, I was looking at the SAIDS list earlier today, and you can be pinged, not for getting caught, you can be pinged for what they call whereabouts failures. So you for instance, you know that you're dirty. Okay, you're gonna melt the cup. So what you do is the guy knocks on your door, you hide away. You duck under the bed and you keep chup still. I mean, it happens all the time. So so you ultimately going to get pinged for a whereabouts failure, because that's going to get reported, and you have several of these, and then you get banned for a whereabouts failure. So you'd rather be, the stigma there isn't for drug taking, it's for being sloppy with your calendar, with your diary, something like that. So that's one means of kind of getting away with it, but ultimately you will still be banned, because they consider it a positive drug test. That's the people who control it. I think the interesting thing, it's almost like an arms race, LEIGH-ANN, where the doctors and the medical experts try to keep one step ahead, but the guys who are developing the steroids are so smart, and they're coming up with new things all the time. Much as what London proved was that we're going to take your blood. No, we won't be able to find you guilty of anything now, but let's hope in 10 years' time they develop something good enough they can say, yeah, you were cheating. But my concern is, I think it's practically a lost cause. But it's not to say you must quit, absolutely not. But definitely the cheats are winning.
I mean, if we look at the future of sports around the globe, I mean, are things going to get better? Are they going to be worse? I mean, what's your gut feel about where we're headed?
Well, my gut feel is, I mean, the trajectory suggests it will get worse, and it will get worse because there's more money than ever in sport. The money will continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's more at stake. But equally, it's that sort of old risk versus reward ratio. That's the interesting thing. Am I prepared to take the risk? And, if you think what the big prize is, but then you realize, okay, but equally, if I get caught, I'm going to get hammered. But I think most athletes, famously, they asked several athletes a couple of years ago whether if they won an Olympic gold and got all the glory and all the money and everything like that, they'd be prepared to die, several years later just for that. And the vast majority said, yeah, we'll go for it. That in itself, that chase for glory, that in itself is a drug for athletes. It fuels athletes. And I think that's why so many do opt to go the dirty route, because of, what you can earn.
Well, Clinton, it's been a few years since your book came out. I mean, can you just recall what the impact was that your book had at the time? And if in the years since, if anything's changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one thing that has happened, the rugby environment used to be a little bit wild. There's no question about it. SA Rugby, following several high-profile busts, I mean, really high-profile players, Springboks, things like that. Was a former World Rugby Junior Player of the Year, got caught just on the eve of the 2019 World Cup up here at Janti. So there were cases like that. And SA Rugby, there was a reckoning for SA Rugby. So they worked really hard to clean things up. Education has become critical now. So ignorance is no excuse. And there are various pockets where things do improve. But you've got smaller federations that struggle financially to run the game. And something like shutting down doping is very far down their list of priorities, I must say. You talk about impact. So it was interesting that the book was optioned for a documentary. and certain high-level people in South African sport shut it down very, very obviously. They said, we're not going to do this, we're not going to back it, we're not going to support it, we're not going to be involved. I'd reached out to several people to get involved with, because I'd signed on with a production company, and yeah, I was very sad, but ultimately we were beaten. They just didn't want the story to be told. So I was quite happy that, the book itself was published, but unfortunately it was never made into a documentary because it was shut down.
Did you at any point ever feel like your life was in danger with some of the scratching and digging that you were doing?
No, no, not at all. There is a chapter or two where I deal about, I talk about the steroids network, so it's effectively you've got steroid kings down in Cape Town, and they're gangsters rather than sportsmen. So, I was a little bit anxious around those kind of guys, but there was never any point where I was threatened or anything like that. I mean, I interviewed people. I mean, there was one bloke who was murdered down in Camps Bay. I spoke to his mate who got a little bit aggressive with me and things like that. He just felt that I was going to misrepresent his mate's story, because the guy used to sell, he had a supplement shop in Boksburg, and of course in the back room he had other stuff as well, and then he was stabbed in the neck with a broken bottle, and it was just all quite ugly stuff, and the guy was threatening with me. But no, there was no sort of nasty consequences. I mean, on the contrary, I think the book was fairly well received.
Yeah, sadly, it seems as though you could probably do a follow-up book as well. In the last few years, there've been a few more developing stories.
Oh, true story. Yeah, I mean, today the Telegraph of London had a full-page story about suggesting that South Africa's World Cup wins were a little bit smelly because our testing regime has diminished. So we by sixfold. So, for instance, we've gone from over 700 tests annually down to just over, about 128 annually. So what they're making some crazy assumptions, saying, oh, well, that means that the World Cups were won because of steroids. That's kind of what they're presuming, they're putting out there. This was a Telegraph today. And I, in fact, sent the story to Khalid at the SA Institute for Drug-Free Sport, just to show him, that is a narrative that doesn't go away, as long as the Springboks are winning World Cups and as long as prominent rugby players are getting caught. So you have, for instance, the Lions prop and Klabakanye at the moment, who has this drugs test hovering above him. I mean, it's been shambolic the way it's been handled by medical doctors and things like that. But all that's just grist to the mill for these guys who are trying to beat South African rugby, or claim that our wins are based on nefarious means, which is a bit daft. So it's interesting. I'm chatting to you today, barely hours after the story is published in the Telegraph today. So it's kind of made headlines around the rugby world, although nobody who's seriously connected to this is giving it much credence.
Yeah, but it's amazing. You put an idea out there and all of a sudden it's like wildfire, just spreads everywhere and rumor suddenly becomes fact. So it's a dangerous narrative.
Exactly. And to defend states, so yes, the Boks are tested less than they were 5 years ago, but it's because the budget for SAID is so limited. It's onus isn't on SA Rugby to be doing the testing. The onus is on SAID to come in and do the testing, and their budgets have been slashed. What are they meant to do? So Khalid Khalan, for instance, is going to start fundraising, trying to raise money so he can do more testing, increase the testing. So yes, rugby's had fewer positives, but rugby's also had fewer tests. But so has cricket, so has cycling, so is rowing, so is boxing, so is athletics. So it's quite cynical just to take shots at rugby. Yes, rugby sometimes deserves it, but in this instance, it applies to all sport, not just rugby.
And one final question before you go, just in terms of your experience of having written the book, of putting this great work out into the world. I mean, was there anything that surprised you about the experience? What were some of the lessons that you took from that? Because I feel like whenever you put something out there that comes from you, it's almost a process of, I don't want to say a healing journey, but it's a process of having reached some sort of conclusion and having grown in some way. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think what it really showed me was just, and I grew up, I was besotted with the Springboks, and for me these guys were gods, untouchable and incredibly special. And then I met boxers through the years. I was lucky, as a fan, I used to chase after them, and as a sport writer, I used to be around them. And increasingly, I found that the one mistake is to put people on a pedestal, which is what I used to do. And they're mortal. They're just plain, and often they're just like plain oaks. They're just trying to get through the day, and they've made a few mistakes, that kind of thing. And I felt empathetic in many cases that, these are guys just trying to make their way, and they weren't really trying to cheat in the traditional sense. They absolutely were not. But they just, there's things like peer pressure. There's things like knowing that someone could take your place. And for instance, rugby, its place in South African society. You become a big deal, that kind of thing. Again, that was at risk reward, and people felt that, they didn't want to surrender that, so perhaps take steroids, without fully realizing the consequences. So for me, it was just about discovering these guys were all too human, all too fallible, made mistakes, and almost without fail, felt desperately sorry for doing so.
Clinton, this is also a podcast about health, about longevity, and one of the themes that we're pursuing is performance under pressure, which is about the fact that we live in a stressful environment. Are there any nuggets that you have that you personally apply to your own life when maybe you're feeling like the stress is getting too much? Are there any kind of things that you do to calm yourself, to regulate your nervous system? Anything that you can share with us?
It's a really good question. So about 10 years ago, my wife dragged me off to a place in Houghton. It was like a mystic place for meditation. And so I sat through these meditation courses, which it was kind of new, a little bit like, too spiritual. And, I didn't really get it. And I used to drive into the multi-choice building early in the mornings, and I used to park on the absolute bottom, and I used to sit in my car and meditate for 30 minutes, while it was still quiet, while I had time. I had a mantra. That kind of thing. And I did that for about 2 years. At night, I would sit up in my bed, and it has to be dark and quiet and things like that. And I do my meditation, and it made me feel better, but it only lasted for about 2 years. But the really interesting thing, Leanne, so I don't meditate now at all. I don't really have the time. I didn't feel that it made that much of an impact. But sometimes at night, I will recite the mantra to myself. Just, I suppose, an old habit or something, just to help me. It might just help me sleep, calm me, those kind of things. So I do that when the pressure builds. The other thing is I'm a big believer in planning. I have lists and things, and I plan and I try execute. And so long as the plan is good for me, and I feel that I can pull it off. So if I have a list of things and I tick them off, and then I should be okay. Of course, it doesn't always work out, but it's what I've worked out for myself.
I'm sure they're very well written lists.
Well, I hope so.
Thanks for listening to episode 4. Next week, we continue exploring the science of performance enhancement. Subscribe so you don't miss it. This is the Enhanced Pod.